Okay, so let's talk about Homeland Security Secretary Kristie Noem, who recently went to Latin America and she visited Costa Rica, Honduras, Guatemala, as well as Panama, and she had a lot to say, and so do I.
President and on the bilateral level about what we can do as far as joint operations to go after criminals that would wish to do individuals harm, what we can do to make sure that we're sharing technologies, working with private companies on the newest and latest and greatest technologies when it comes to drone surveillance and also counter-drone technologies that will help us take down those that are using this to go out and proliferate the narco trafficking that we see every day in our countries. We also talked extensively about cybersecurity and what we can do to harden our critical infrastructure. As many people know, the Department of Homeland Security is an agency which has 23 different components that are responsible for not only protecting the homeland of the United States of America, but also every citizen that is there that comes in and out of the country, every single product or good that enters the country or leaves, but also we are the cybersecurity agency of the nation. And our job is to not only hunt down bad actors from other countries that may wish to do us harm, such as the PRC, China, North Korea, Iran, Russia, but also that we would harden our systems and help protect our electrical grids, our water infrastructure, and also work with small and medium-sized businesses to give them the information that they need to keep their citizens safe and to keep their necessary daily needs going forward. We shared and discussed how we can work together and continue to build partnerships with Guatemala to share that information with them to the benefit of their nation. We so appreciate the President and the Minister's leadership on migration efforts, on the fact that they have built out programs for that when Guatemalans choose to come from the United States back home here, that they will not only be welcomed and that it will be facilitated, but also that they will be able to have a government that supports them with housing, with caring for their families, with training for jobs so that they can provide for their future and for their children and for their grandchildren. This country can be an example to other countries and can be a leader in the partnerships that we can build and then hold up as an example to other countries on what they can do to welcome home their own citizens. I was so incredibly proud of the President today when he talked extensively about how he wishes to take unaccompanied minor children and reunite them with their families here in Guatemala. We have hundreds of them identified in the United States that President Trump has identified already and found that were trafficked or were separated from their families. Many of them are Guatemalans, and the President has indicated that he would like to help facilitate that return to their families and help them with their education and their training quickly, and would work with us to do that. That is a compassion that we rarely see that rises to the highest levels of government in many countries, and I'm grateful for Guatemala for being a leader in this program and what we can do working together. Unaccompanied minor children is a program under the ORR program in the United States that I'll work with Secretary Kennedy on to facilitate that as soon as possible. I do want to thank you all for hosting so many of our individuals that work on security operations here in this country. Our Customs and Border Protection units have a presence here, as well as HSI. We work with the DEA, FDA, other individuals. We also work with many of our law enforcement individuals in the Department of Justice to help make sure that we're working on extradition efforts of those that are the most dangerous, that would need to return back home to the United States to face consequences for their crimes, but also what we can do to return Guatemalan criminals here so that they can face justice for the crimes to which they have perpetuated. I am incredibly proud to work for a president, and President Donald J. Trump, who cares about his country, who cares about strong borders and also believes that the law should be applied equally and fairly to everyone. And he has worked extensively and has reached out to many different countries to build the types of relationships like we have here in Guatemala to make sure that we are helping to facilitate that with them as well. Both he and this country want to keep our citizens safe. And in discussing this visit with him this morning, he sends all of his best to the people of Guatemala and is grateful for you and for your hospitality, but also your work to keep America safe and to keep your country safe and to continue to do that together in a united way. May God continue to bless the country of Guatemala, and God continue to bless the great United States.
So many people could not understand why Latin Americans decided to vote for Donald Trump. But the biggest factor was the Biden administration. The Biden administration decided to play in our faces and decided to lie and then go behind our backs. Communities in danger. They decided to open the border. Kamala Harris decided to go to Guatemala and tell Guatemalans that she wanted to address the root of the issue while at the same time pushing for vaccines, even though Guatemalans, part of the issue has been the distrust Guatemalans have when it comes to the USA and its involvement in Guatemala and how it funds a lot of the disgusting corrupt people. And in Guatemala, part of the root issue, like I said, is that distrust. USA has been known to go into Guatemala specifically not only to test on Guatemalans, but also to inject Guatemalans through vaccines and inject diseases or also like STDs. So So again, there has always been that distrust from Guatemalans when it comes to the USA being involved in Guatemala. And Kamala Harris was not addressing the issue at all, because part of the issue is just overall the history between Guatemala and the USA and the disgusting horrors and the genocide that happened during the 1960s all the way to the early 2000s. And I'm saying early 2000s because there were cases in 1999. The military were still kidnapping children from Guatemala and sending them off into adoption agencies that would be sent to the USA or parts of Europe. So again, there has always been that distrust and horror, and instead Kamala Harris decided to play in our faces. And for example, she talked about don't come, yet the Biden administration left the border open. So again, you're saying don't come, but your actions are completely different. When Kamala Harris decided to go to Guatemala, she talked about sending funding towards the LGBT, towards women's rights, blah, 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 blah. But again, a lot of that funding ended up going to corrupt elite groups, leaders that the USA very much, especially the Biden administration, was very much aware about. Yet, they still kept sending all of this funding. And also, Guatemala is a conservative country in Latin America. So you're pushing for LGBT rights, you're pushing for, feminism in Guatemala. And to liberals, that might sound good, but no, that is not good, because what ends up happening is that feminist movement is disrupting our Native American traditional lifestyle. Now, some LGBT people could argue with me that our Native American traditions always had, a third gender, whatever, but actually are two-spirit people. But actually, two-spirit was invented in 1990 by the LGBT, okay? That was pushed on Native Americans. And again, just because that some people are like that in our culture doesn't mean that in general that is how our culture is run, because that is not how our culture is run, especially in Native American communities. In Native American communities, it is very much based on gender roles. And in Guatemala especially, that is going to disrupt the indigenous wave that we have always lived with gender roles. Now, what I love about the Donald Trump administration is that they're not hiding what they are about. They want the border closed, and they're closing that border, and they're doing whatever they can in order to put pressure against people coming through. The Donald Trump administration, they're actually doing things to prevent people from coming. And the fact that 0 people were able to cross the border, it just speaks volumes at the actions that the Donald Trump administration is willing to take versus the Biden administration. Now, hello you guys, so this is part 2. This is another reason why I am against illegal immigration. Instead of us coming to America, we need to start addressing our issues in Latin America. One thing about the Palestinian movement, and something that inspired me from the Palestinian movement, was seeing how despite the disgusting genocide that the Palestinians are going through, they decide to stay in their country and still fight. That is something that Latin Americans need to be inspired by, because in Latin America, we do the opposite of what Palestinians do. Now, I completely understand that there are also Palestinians that leave their country. However, there is a huge emphasis in Palestine on staying in their own country and fighting, because if they leave, they know that the other people will take over. And something that Latin Americans lack is education, as well as the ability to continue to fight for their country. We have, as Latin Americans, have been on the forefront of the civil rights movements in the American continent in general. I am not talking about the 1960s. I'm talking about prior to all of that. Latin America has always been an example of movements. However, Latin Americans don't have that same value, that same drive that we used to have, and we need to come back and go back to our countries and have pride in our countries. Now, just because I am here in the USA does not mean that I don't have an obligation to my own country. I still have an obligation to my own country, because guess what? I am a USA citizen, and part of that, I do feel guilt towards that, because I understand that there's tons of people in my own country still needing assistance, still needing help, still needing people to advocate for them. And however I can help, I am willing to help. And I am going to continue, God willingly, throughout my years until I am old of age.
Of role in child trafficking says Trump's team now locating 300,000 missing minors. What? Rob, if you can play this clip, this is a major accusation being made, but here's Bobby Kennedy. Go for it.
We have ended HHS as the role as the vector, the principal vector in this country for child trafficking. And during the Biden administration, HHS became a collaborator in child trafficking and for sex and for slavery. And we have ended that, and we're very aggressively going out and trying to find these children, 300,000 children that were lost by the Biden administration.
Okay, go for it. And I'm so happy because I don't even think we planned that you showed that California lawmakers are out there trying to make it less of a crime, a lesser crime, for trafficking 16-year-old children. And I hope everybody understands what happened. This was at the cabinet meeting, and this is the new head of HHS, Robert Kennedy Jr., that's saying, bro, this is putting blame on them, saying that they were collaborators on children that were for sex slaves and for work, okay? And by the way, do you guys know who the old HHS secretary was? Xavier Becerra. And guess who his assistant secretary was? Rob, can you show this? This is the face of Rachel Levine, a dude that was dressing as a woman.
That's a dude behind the dude.
Yeah, and you would think
the other dude.
Well, you would think these people, and it's weird, isn't it weird that this group is all about young children and brainwashing these young children and pushing this ideology on them? And think about it, the sponsorship, when you set unvetted people to come pick up, it was a turnstile for children, and they're gone, Pat. There's no dead bodies, there's no bones. We don't know where the hell they are. I mean, we could have an understanding. There's no Epstein Island, but like we talked about last time, they're going somewhere to these disgusting pedophiles, okay? And Alejandro Mayorkas, and I love keep bringing his name up, he's one of the main ones too. It was all a plan. You open up the border, leave it completely open. These people are getting all the 300,000 missing children that they want, and they're arguing that it wasn't a failure, what they did, okay? It was intentional. Trump has shut it down 100%, and it was big business. And then, as if we didn't know, look at all the stuff with Epstein, Virginia Giuffre committing suicide and all that stuff. They're blocking bills for felony for these children. It's big business for taking advantage of these children. And for him to say that means it was all a plan. He called them collaborators. That last administration, and that's for all the people out there, they're like, you don't care about Mexicans and immigrants. And no. It was a big business for freaking sex trafficking. And I have to pray for them, but
Allegedly, they have to prove it.
They have to prove it. But he's saying,
I know, but they have to prove it, Vinny.
Yeah, that's my question to you. Do you think anybody's going to be held accountable? Because there's no excuse for leaving the border wide open. There's absolute zero. You did it on purpose. And from what he is saying is that they were collaborators in bringing these people in.
By U.S. Border Patrol, the highest number in 20 years. And more unaccompanied migrant children come from Guatemala than anywhere else. Over 16,000 unaccompanied children tonight in custody. What's victory look like?
Known for a long time that under the Biden-Harris administration, HHS, which is responsible for unaccompanied children, they lost track of over 340,000 unaccompanied migrant children. They failed to vet sponsors, and they blocked law enforcement from getting critical information to ensure the safety of these children. Now, we know several investigative reports, both from government sources and outside, have reported that these kids were sent to unsafe addresses, even non-existent ones. They were exposed to trafficking and exploitation, and many of them have not been found to this day. Now, I know you've had a lot on your plate. It's been a crazy 6 months, but I know this is a top priority for HHS. So like so many other things that you've been tasked with cleaning up, what specific steps is HHS taking to restore the accountability, improve the sponsor vetting, and ensure that law enforcement can do its job to protect these children and find these children?
One of the major reason that the Biden administration lost track of all those children is because they were emphasizing speed over security. And there were political reasons for that. They wanted to get the kids out of U.S. custody, so they were handing them off to anybody. It didn't require background checks. It didn't require identification even. I've watched horror stories of the same person picking up child after child after child, using different names and different addresses. One of the addresses was a strip club. One of the addresses was a parking lot. One of the addresses was an empty lot that was filled with shipping containers. And this character was getting all these kids. One person got 42 kids to one address. What we're doing now is DNA testing on every sponsor. We're doing personal identification. We're doing background checks, and we're doing income verification.
Thank you, Ms.
Porque no solo es una, son un montón. Y sabemos que el Estado no lo está garantizando. Hay otras víctimas mucho más pequeñas que María Cristina. Y son mujeres que prefieren aguantar, prefieren pasarla solita. Y es por eso que nosotros aquí estamos presentes. ¿Está bien?
In the vast majority of cases, attackers are close family members or neighbours. COVID lockdowns provided the perfect conditions for abuse. In 2020, a staggering average of 13 girls between the age of 10 to 14 years old became pregnant through rape every day.
Let me repeat that for people that did not hear that. 13 girls a day during the COVID lockdown were getting impregnated through rape ages 10 to 14 years old in Guatemala. In 2017, there were girls in orphanage that escaped because they were being trafficked, and guess what? They got burned alive because they got sent back to that orphanage. Now, this type of violence has been continuing since the beginning of colonization, when it was known to the Queen of Spain that the Spanish were raping children, yet they still continued through the colonization. To this day, that issue is still happening. In the genocide of Guatemala, 100,000 women were raped, and that is the women that were documented. These are issues that we as Guatemalans need to address instead of going to America. Now, I'm gonna make a part 3 and go more into depth about Guatemala, okay? Now, those were 2 videos. Now, I also showed other videos, but those were the 2 videos that I had showed in part 2. And I showed that first video about the 13 girls a day during COVID-19 and how they were being impregnated, 13 girls a day, ages 10 to 14 years old. And the reason I put that in there is because it ties back to the bigger overall issue in Guatemala, which is the trafficking of children. Now, what Guatemala and the USA needs is honesty, and also healing, and moving forward with commitment of doing great with our 2 nations, because the USA is an incredible nation and Guatemala is also an incredible nation that helps the USA, especially when it comes to agriculture. Now, if we want to heal the relationship between Guatemala and the USA, I believe that the USA needs to be transparent about what happened during the genocide of Guatemala. Politicians in Guatemala that were involved in the genocide and are still running and still in power one way or another, all of those people need to completely be punished for their action, as well as for the continuation of still being in power. Because a lot of the issues that is going on in Guatemala is also the corruption, okay? And the Biden and Kamala Harris administration was playing in our faces and was talking about funding, for women's rights, LGBT, things that sound nice, but really what was going and being funded was these elite leaders that are known to be corrupt. Moving forward, the USA and Guatemala need to understand that in order to heal our countries and our nations, and in order for us to prevent people from even crossing, from even leaving Guatemala and wanting to come here illegally, in order for us to address that issue, we need to address the human rights violations that is going on in Guatemala due to companies exploiting the vulnerability of Guatemalan citizens. There are many companies known to still be practicing modern day slavery, and there's a lot of violence towards Native American communities, especially, and lands. So if the USA 100% does not want anybody leaving Guatemala, they need to make sure that they start addressing the modern slavery and changing practices in order to still benefit Guatemalans, but also still keep these agricultural systems still going, but in a healthy way. I believe that we can trade between Guatemala and North America just like the Mayans used to do with other Native Americans before colonization. We have always traded. So there's no reason why Guatemalan agriculture or anything coming from Guatemala cannot be imported into the USA in a humane manner. There is no reason why we cannot be addressing these human rights violations that is occurring in Guatemala. The illiteracy rate in Guatemala is such a huge issue due to colonization and the enslavement of indigenous Mayans. And that is an issue that we in 2025 moving forward, us as Guatemalans, us as Latin Americans, Mexican government does not want the Guatemalan people in Mexico. And so Mexican government also needs to address this issue as well and help Latin America. This is how Latin Americans need to help our country addressing this issue. Instead of us going and becoming feminists, we need to go into our countries and help our people learn how to read, learn how to write. Instead of pushing for LGBT rights that only a few people in Latin America are even part of the LGBT, and instead of addressing that issue, we need to address the overall issue that is going to help everyone, not just a few people. You cannot say that you are for women's rights as well, Kamala Harris, and then still fund the same people that are violating women's rights. Now, RFK talked about DNA and making sure that people who are going to be, taking children and saying, "Oh, I'm their family member," that they take DNA samples to make sure that they are indeed family members. Now, that's still not going to address 100% the issues of trafficking, because again, sometimes family members are involved in this. However, I still believe that is amazing, that is a great way to fix that issue. Now, in Guatemala, what needs to end up occurring in order for them to really make sure that the Guatemalan people are being protected is to do this, is to also take DNA samples of all these children that are being impregnated, and take the DNA samples of these children and tie them back to their abusers. Because any child that is being impregnated, that is a crime. And already those people need to be punished. And through DNA sampling, we can really get that done. We can start funding that instead of funding feminism, which is destroying the Native American already gender roles that we have been having since before pre-colonization. Instead of encouraging feminism, we need to be encouraging this type of protection for women. In Guatemala, abortion is illegal, and I support that, because that means that all of those girls being impregnated, the evidence cannot be killed. The evidence has to still be alive. And with that, we can then take those samples of the DNA of the child and tie them back to the abuser. And that is something that other conservatives have been talking about as well. Another issue that is fueling this trafficking is the sex tourism. And Guatemala and the USA also need to address this, because the USA, European countries, even Asian countries like the Japanese like to go to Latin America and they like to traffic children. In fact, Mexico has been titled the Bangkok of Latin America. Why? Because Bangkok is known for the trafficking of children, and the trafficking of children is being fueled by all of this tourism. Tourism is another root cause to why Latin Americans are leaving to begin with.